Yo, what's going on, everyone? We're live right here on the Awesemo.com NFL Strategy Show. It's the Showdown edition, and we got a fun one for you today. The Carolina Panthers hosting the Atlanta Falcons in the midst of Hurricane Zeta. But as Matt and I discussed right before we started, we think, well, we're no meteorologists, but we think we're going to be in okay shape by the time this game kicks off at 8:20 Eastern time. So happy to have all of you guys with us. Fun one to break down on both sides. Could be a pretty explosive game offensively, but the total sits at only 51 points with the Panthers laying 2 points out there in North Carolina. Matt, what's going on, man? Glad to be with you.
Not too much, man. As usual, excited to break down some single game action. Becoming probably my favorite format now these days. I just like getting into the fringe players. It's really fun, deep analysis.
It really is. And you know, I was thinking about this the other day. You see these huge contests on DraftKings and FanDuel, like the featured ones, right? But we're seeing, particularly this year, if you don't like joining the Millie Maker each week, I know that's not one that I like to get into because I'm not maxing it. And even when you do, it's incredibly difficult with the pay structure there. Although Neil Orfield of Awesemo, one of our subs, took it down this last week, so that's amazing. But it's incredibly difficult. And you know, every week you have great contests, single entry, 3 max, even other 150 maxes that have better payout structures like the $500,000 slant. Matt, if you look at the contest that you've got tonight and pretty much every showdown slate, particularly Monday and Thursday, there are some amazing contests with much better pay structures for pretty much any level of player with any bankroll. That's what makes this so great. You don't have to put everything you don't have to only play the biggest one to take down or have the opportunity to take down something big.
Yeah, I feel like with the main slate, sometimes they just force a Millie Maker in there regardless. And we've seen the Millie Maker week over week sometimes just get worse and worse as far as structure goes. But these island games, there's enough demand for them. Essentially Monday, Thursday, even Sunday night, we even see Millie Makers on the island games. It's been fantastic to see these things grow. And it's nice to get some flatter payout structures too, where, you know, it's not 1 million to first, then 100K to second.
Right. And well, we're here to break it down and hopefully help you guys and ourselves win some money. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, hit that subscribe button. You guys have helped us out a ton with this. I've even seen the amount of people that watch the show, the amount that are subscribed has gone through the roof. So that's awesome. And it's a win-win for both of us, right? You get to watch some good free DFS content, and it helps us continue to build our channel and put out free content to everyone. So subscribe, hit that notification bell. And as you know, hit that thumbs up button. One of the easiest ways to help support us here at Awesemo. So, Matt, we've got one game on the showdown slate, Atlanta Falcons at the Carolina Panthers. We'll jump into the specifics here, get into the weeds on each side. But before any of that, let's just take a general look at an overview of this game, knowing that the Falcons are not as bad as their record would indicate, right? Last week, if Todd Gurley doesn't accidentally score, they go on to win that game. It's not disputable. They go on to win that game. The onside kick against Dallas, had they not botched that, they go on to win that game. There's several games, and I believe I'm missing a couple too, where they had a very good chance to win. They're not good, but they're not terrible. They got Ricardo Allen back. They got Keanu Neal back. Both are finally but fully healthy. And on the other side, we don't anticipate McCaffrey returning, even though there was some speculation around that. But the Panthers defense, particularly in the passing game, has been better than advertised. And the offense with Teddy Bridgewater at the helm has actually been pretty competent. So I don't know, this game has a lot of moving pieces, and I don't think it's as easy to break down as you might think.
Yeah, I agree with you on the Atlanta side. I definitely do not think they're as bad as their record indicates. And you mentioned it. I don't know if this defense is good, but they're at least healthier. And we've even seen guys like Dante Fowler miss time. I mean, like AJ Terrell was on the COVID list for a little bit. He's their first round pick at corner. He was widely expected to be their replacement for Desmond Trufant, which hasn't exactly worked out, but at least he's out there now. They're not playing, practice squad level players. So maybe we could see some positive regression from this Atlanta Falcons defense at some point this year. They're pretty strong up front with some of their defensive linemen. And I've been really impressed with Carolina too. I'm not sure if this is the Joe Brady effect coming in as their OC. They've still been playing fairly slow, but highly efficient, basically the most efficient football we've ever seen out of Teddy Bridgewater in his career.
Yeah, and one more thing. McKinley, defensive end for the Falcons, I don't think he's ruled out yet, Matt, but he hasn't practiced on a short week. If he's out, that makes it much more difficult for this team to get to the quarterback as well, which has already been an issue this year. They have not been able to apply pressure to opposing quarterbacks.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he is out.
He's official. Is he officially ruled out?
I think so. Maybe someone in the chat can confirm this.
Okay. Yeah, I saw. Okay, you're probably right. I'll take your word for it. I just know
Loco in the chat says he's out.
He's officially out. Okay.
Yeah, that's what Loco says.
Might not seem like a big deal. Clearly not going to swing the line on any game, but it does have some implications today. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's dive into it. We'll start with the road team, the Atlanta Falcons. And by the way, some crazy pricing, like DJ Moore's salary and a couple of these other guys are probably less than you would think on DraftKings specifically. We'll kick it off with the run game, and then we'll get into the passing game. Todd Gurley's best performance this season, Matt, has come against this Carolina team where he ran for 121 yards on 14 attempts, averaged nearly 9 yards per carry, scored a touchdown, had 28 fantasy points. Outside of that, he's been very inefficient this season, but he has seen 14 plus carries in every single game this year. And he's also seen 12 targets over his last 3 games. They want to establish the run. They want to get it going. They've just had a tough time from an efficiency standpoint, but the Carolina Panthers' one real weakness defensively is that run game. Very curious to see where you stand on a guy like Todd Gurley, who not only has a good chance to break out here, but is also pretty reasonably priced, if you ask me.
He's reasonably priced and reasonably owned. I think this Atlanta Falcons offensive line is underrated. They just have a slew of first-round picks across the O-line, and game script has really prevented them from establishing the run this year at times. I know they've been up in games and punted them off occasionally as well. But there's a couple reasons to like Gurley. You mentioned the volume. It's been fantastic for him. In the past 2 games, he's had opportunities of 23 and 25, and that's with Brian Hill still mixing in. Part of the reason I think they're able to do that is we're dealing with an extremely fast team. They're 3rd in plays per game and 4th in seconds per play. They do pass the ball at a top 10 rate a lot of times because they're trailing. But even with that, it's still enough volume for Gurley to approach 20 touches on a week-to-week basis, with Brian Hill still mixing in for about 5 to 8. And I mean, Gurley's just not being owned as if he's a bell cow back. Right now, I'm seeing 4.5% in the captain slot. He's not being priced as if he's a back, seeing 20 touches, 8,400 on DraftKings specifically. I think that's kind of an error. What do you make of Gurley?
I really like him. I like the backs in both of these games, but my favorite running back of the 2 is definitely Todd Gurley for a couple of reasons. Strammy in chat says he also has a chip on his shoulder after last week. I'm not a big narrative guy, but yeah, if he's coming in to prove something, he can certainly do it against Carolina. The great thing about this matchup, though, you don't need any narratives because it's just very good. Panthers are allowing nearly 5 yards per carry. That's 3rd worst in the league. The Atlanta Falcons almost certainly want to look to get the run game going because it has been good for them this year when they can actually make that happen. They just have struggled, and they've also gone behind in a bunch of games. But once you sift through everything else, you pretty much hit on it. The touch counts are very solid, and while the efficiency hasn't been there, volume is everything. So take volume and a relatively inefficient back, and combine that with a defense whose biggest issue is allowing insane efficiency in the run game. You've got a recipe for success. So yeah, 43 attempts and 7 targets over his last 3 games. That's huge volume. I'm very much willing to overlook the overall production in terms of yardage totals in favor of looking at how much work he can get against this Carolina defense. And that's what it comes down to for me.
I agree with you. And like you mentioned, there's this perception that Todd Gurley's old and washed and his knees can't hold up. And I think that's what's reducing his ownership too. I'm actually okay with Gurley in the captain slot, and I think I'll have a fair amount of him tonight. I'm I'm not really worried about Brian Hill. And again, I think just overall play volume is going to allow both of these guys to mix in, and Gurley should still approach 15 to 20 touches.
I have no problem with him in the captain spot either. And let's be fair, Matt, it's tough sometimes to justify, as crazy as it sounds, it's been tough to justify running backs that aren't, Alvin Kamara or Mike Davis type pass catching backs in the captain spot and showdown slates this season, simply because, the passing games just explode. And, that's one thing to consider here, but I'm not opposed to it either. And I guess I could throw this question to you as well. Could you see this being a game that isn't necessarily dominated by passing attacks on both sides? Like, could you see this being a game where Matt Ryan and his receiving core come down with, relatively underwhelming totals while Todd Gurley puts up a big game? Because if that's the case, then of course we need to have interest in him at the captain spot.
I think there's a couple reasons we could see that. One is the matchup you mentioned. Carolina is a run funnel defense. They've lost K'Wan Short for the year, and they also lost their second-round pick, Yetur Gross-Matos, out of Penn State. He was a strong defensive end for them. So it's been a run funnel defense. And then we need to look at pricing a little bit here too. So Gurley's coming in with a fair price. We look over to Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley, and I think when we start looking at stacks with Matt Ryan in this single game environment, it becomes a little cost prohibitive, and you're going to have to punt somewhere if you take someone like Ridley or Julio Jones, or God forbid you try to play them both, you're certainly going to be punting in that spot. Gurley coming in with a fraction of the price, I think that is a big factor here and what could put him over the edge. And he's been fairly solid as a pass catcher. He's not Christian McCaffrey, obviously, but target counts are decent this year. You mentioned 7, I believe, in the last 2 games. That's more than okay.
What are you doing with the passing attack here with Matt Ryan, Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley? They are 3 of the 4 most expensive players on this slate. Christian McCaffrey's up there at the top, but we got word this morning that it's very unlikely that he's activated. There was a lot. If you looked at any game preview or anything for this game, in the header, in the title was, "Is Christian McCaffrey returning?" All of that yesterday when I was checking some of them out. Very unlikely seems to be the case. But Matt Ryan, highest priced, assuming of active players. Teddy Bridgewater second, then Ridley third, Julio Jones fourth. They're very expensive. They're very expensive, Matt. And while they are both spectacular options, and no one would ever turn their nose up at being able to stack Matt Ryan with Ridley and Jones, but it does do weird things for roster construction. And I built some lineups, just hand built some lineups, trying different configurations to see what I came up with. And that stacking combination right there is pretty difficult because there are very, very few players down towards the bottom of the player pool today that offer really anything of significant value.
Yeah, if you take that stack, you're going to have a lot of fun playing Brandon Powell today. So it's going to be tough to differentiate these guys. It's similar to Lockett and Metcalf. The target distribution is so narrow between Ridley and Julio Jones when they're both active. Really, you want to get to these 2 guys, but DraftKings did a fantastic job pricing them where it's exceedingly hard to get them both and then pair with Matt Ryan, which would be something you wanted to do if you are targeting Jones and Ridley. So it's a good job with pricing. I think we look to ownership here, maybe to break some tiebreakers, or if you're playing multiple lineups, you just try to get some of both. I think Julio Jones coming in slightly lesser owned than Calvin Ridley would be the player I look to. And again, these are just very, very close in ownership as well. So we're just nitpicking. But Julio Jones has received more targets than Ridley in each of the last 2 games. Not by much, but it's at least worth mentioning here. Julio Jones was removed from the injury report altogether. So I think that's a positive sign in his direction too.
So if you look at our ownership projections at awesemo.com, if you wanted to check these out for an amazing price, use the promo code PUMPKIN while we're at it. Because it's, Halloween, pumpkin, use that promo code. You get the Awesemo Plus Platinum NFL Weekly, meaning everything for NFL, access to all of our NFL content, from ownership projections to player projections to the top stack tool to all of the amazing showdown tools. We have awesome showdown tools for all of the sites that are running showdown contests that are really different from any other site, any other DFS content site out there. all of our premium articles that these guys put so much time into. Great analysis across the board, the lineup builder, and so much more that I'm forgetting to touch on because, well, we're just loaded with valuable content and more specifically tools built by the number one DFS player in the world. All of that great stuff. $10.31 for the week. That's almost $20 off the original price. So the Awesemo Plus Platinum NFL Weekly. I've had a lot of people DMing me about this, telling me that they signed up, and why not? $10 a week, $10.31 for the week. You get to check it out. Not a whole lot of risk involved there. I think you'll stick around. I think you're going to love it. But it's a great way to see what we've got going on without having to, assume too much risk in that scenario. So you've got through Halloween to do it. So 10/31 through 10/31, use that promo code PUMPKIN and check it out. If you just want to get some basic content, but also all of our showdown material, ownership, projections, we have a top stack tool, like a top stack tool light. We have the top plays for showdowns, which goes through everything on a probability basis. All of that stuff, $3.95 a week. Our Express package, the NFL Express package, less than $4 a week. I'll stop talking. Just go to awesemo.com/join, check it out, and you'll see everything we have to offer. We got something for everyone. So what I was getting at here, Matt, is look at the ownership. Had pricing been a little different, and had they not priced guys appropriately, as you pointed out, they did a good job. You would not see Calvin Ridley as the 7th highest owned player or Julio Jones as the 8th highest owned player. You would not see both of them getting less than 10% ownership in the captain spot each.
Yeah, I agree. And great job by DraftKings. So we can't just jam in all of these studs.
Yep.
Again, it's going to lead us to some interesting roster constructions. In sticking with this Atlanta side, do you look to a guy like Russell Gage if you're trying to stack the passing attack? I think maybe you could. He's significantly underpriced. And we did see Russell Gage leave last week's game with a knee injury. He was able to return and he practiced this week. So I think that's positive for his status. I mean, you could also look to Hayden Hurst, 9,600 for Hurst if you're captaining him. His target share is consistent. It's not near Julio Jones or Calvin Ridley, not anywhere close, but 6, 4, and 7 targets in the last 4 games. It's pretty consistent.
Yeah, he has been consistent. And let me ask you that. What's his ownership coming in at?
Hayden Hurst?
Yeah.
He's really low. 16.5%, not even 1% in the captain.
Okay, so I'm glad you brought it up and that we looked at his ownership, because when I was doing research this morning, I actually thought to myself, Hayden Hurst has been better than I thought. And he hasn't been great, but you haven't heard much about him, namely because Todd Gurley's scoring accidental touchdowns and Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones are doing all of the additional work, getting all the attention there down there in Atlanta. But as you mentioned, 6+ targets in 4 of his last 5 games. He has scored 3 times this season, which in 7 games really isn't that bad. And he's involved enough to make a splash if necessary. If you get at his price, and tell me what you think about this, if you get, say, what's he priced at in the utility? 6,400. If you were to get 15 from him, which is highly doable, especially if he scores, you need what? Even what would 15 be? Even 4 for
460 and a score. That's 16.
What is it?
4 catches, 60 yards, and a score is 16.
Right. Okay. So 4 for 60, 4 for 50, and a score. Very doable. At 6,400, that seems like a pretty good bargain.
Yeah, I agree. And so he's priced above Russell Gage is the only thing that really has me concerned. I'm not really even concerned, just a little weary. Like, would you rather save the salary and go down to Gage, I think is the main question we should be asking.
Well, you know what, then? I'll shut up and let you talk about it, because that's a big question for a slate like this.
Gage is a tough evaluation here. We saw a little bit of a shakeup in the Atlanta wide receiver room, and I can't tell how much of this is because Gage was in and out of the game a little bit last week. So Brandon Powell has definitely usurped Olamide Zaccheaus as the number 4 wide receiver, and Powell actually outsnapped Gage last week. We still saw Gage receive 7 targets, Powell only 2 targets. But I don't know if this is Brandon Powell maybe improving a little bit, working his way on the field. He's certainly not going to play more than Gage, but I don't know. If he even sees a quarter of the snaps, I would rather play Hurst over Gage. I'm just not sure how this is going to shake out. Do you have a lean on this? I'm not sure if this is just all injury related or if Brandon Powell is working his way onto the field.
I thought the same thing, right? Because Russell Gage had played 60+% of snaps in 3 straight weeks. I personally like Hayden Hurst a little bit more in this game. Now, the pricing there's a pretty big difference in pricing. If they were similar, you and I wouldn't even be having this conversation. But I just think when you're talking about a showdown slate like this, everyone's in play. Russell Gage is very much in play. So as far as my lean goes, both of them are viable. It's not an 11-game slate where we can just, write one of these guys off. So both of them are solid. The touchdown equity is just a lot higher with somebody like Hayden Hurst. And as you know, not every week, but generally speaking, you need to have a piece of almost every touchdown to win.
Yeah, you do. And you bring up the red zone production a lot. I think that could be very important for Hurst. He'd be the guy I prefer in the spot. It's just, if you're jamming in Julio and Ridley, it might be hard. I think there are other ways you can find some salary relief. I mean, would you even consider Brian Hill for some salary relief? He's not too much cheaper than Gage, but he's down there, and I think he's in play.
It's so tough. And by the way, I actually have to correct myself here. I did not know, maybe you knew this. I did not know that Russell Gage has 8 targets inside the 20 to Hayden Hurst's 3.
I did not know that either.
I honestly just assumed that Hayden Hurst, I'm glad I looked that up because I don't want to give you guys false information here. But even inside the 10, Hayden Hurst has 2 targets to Russell Gage's 4. I'd like to see what weeks those were, though, and who was active and who was inactive. What did you ask about Brian Hill?
I'm just talking about salary relief, and if we're not considering Russell Gage, who we might look to for Atlanta. And I thought Brian Hill might be in play.
It's not the craziest idea. We talked about Cam Akers last week, and he was on the field for 2 snaps, right? I don't think neither of us were saying, hey, go out there and roster Cam Akers. But the conversation has to be had, especially on a day like today. Go ahead right now for people wondering why we talk about some of these dirt cheap players. Go ahead and try and plug in DJ Moore with Teddy Bridgewater alongside Todd Gurley, Julio Jones, and Matt Ryan, and see what you have left. In that case, you won't have enough to even play someone like Brian Hill. But I don't think it's the craziest idea at all. But let's actually do it like this. If you were to play somebody in the 3K or lower range, so it would really just be anybody below these 2 defenses, starting with Ian Thomas to Brian Hill to everybody else. Who would it be if you had to play one south of $3,000 tonight?
I think it's probably Brian Hill, and I don't feel great about it. I mean, you could look to Ian Thomas. Ian Thomas is going to be the player most involved as far as snaps and routes, but he's literally just running wind sprints down the field. He has 1 target in each of his last 3 games, 8 total targets in his last 4. I mean, the only other situation I think we can really look to is this this Brandon Powell situation, if he's maybe working his way in. And I guess one interesting situation we'll talk about is the Seth Roberts, departure. He got cut and he played in every single game this year. That might mean something for Carolina, but it is pretty barren in just the complete punt range.
Yeah, don't run the wrong routes in important times. That's the lesson there. Okay, here's another way to break it down, Matt. You've got somebody else there that is coming in at a pretty discounted price point, not all the way down there, not complete, not in the basement, but that's Curtis Samuel. So here's one guy that I actually want to wait to get to him, but I promise, because I see it in chat, we're going to spend some time on that once we get to the Panthers. Let's first wrap up the Atlanta side of the ball. We talked Gurley. I think we're in agreement that Brian Hill, in some situations, could be a viable punt. You don't need much from him. If he sneaks one in the end zone from 5 yards out, That's all you need. And he's going to be virtually unowned. He's also going to allow you to, it wouldn't surprise me, honestly, if he ended up having 3 fantasy points, 3 DraftKings points, but you stacked your lineup so top heavy elsewhere that it doesn't matter. And you end up having a really good night.
Yeah, I mean, we see this on the main slate a lot with tight end, and we've seen it in some showdown slates too. It's more of that barbell approach where Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley, maybe Gurley in this example, the offense is just so concentrated between them that it doesn't matter what you throw in your last spot. With all the production going to those 3, you can literally take a 0 or something close to it.
Yeah, I'm trying right now. Let's see what we got here, Matt. So I put DJ Moore in the captain spot just because that price is pretty viable, and he's going up against Atlanta. Again, we'll get there, so I don't want to get out in front of my skis. But if you were to play DJ Moore, you could do Brian Hill. I honestly, if you're playing Brian Hill, I don't even hate the idea of playing Todd Gurley too, if it's a salary relief thing, especially if they go heavy on the ground. You can get Hurst, Bridgewater, and you can get Julio Jones into that lineup. So while that might not, and I'm just throwing that together now, while that might not be optimal, I don't know. It shows you that a really cheap guy on this slate specifically allows you to get a lot more freed up salary to go to some more expensive players. So yeah, that's pretty much the way I look at it. Anything else here for Atlanta?
I don't think so. I think the main questions are what you do with the expensive receivers. My personal favorite captain on this side is Gurley. I think he'll provide a little bit of leverage off both receivers in the pass game. Or do you try to get some value? Do you try to go to a guy like Brandon Powell? Do you try to play Brian Hill? That's not my favorite strategy, but it's at least worth talking about.
So last thing, and I want to make sure that you and I always hit on enough strategy and instead of just the plays, because that doesn't always help, right? What do you do with these lineups? We'll say your hand building lineups. What do you do with these lineups if you have Todd Gurley in the captain spot? Because we all know if you have DJ Moore or Julio or Ridley or Anderson in the captain spot, you want to get their one of their quarterbacks in there. Maybe not every time. Like last week, you could have had something different with the projected low-scoring game between Chicago and the Rams. But if you have Bridgewater or Ryan in there, you know that you want to pair them with the 2 pass catchers. But what about when you have a running back in the captain spot that is more so reliant on his ground game than his pass catching game?
Yeah, so running back is going to open a new set of avenues that you can approach when you're trying to think through the game script of what might get you to a winning score. I mean, the obvious one, if you're captaining Gurley, would be, all right, Atlanta got up to an early lead. They're riding Gurley throughout the game. Maybe you want to run on the other side some Carolina pass catchers, some Teddy Bridgewater, play that way. When you have a guy like Gurley who is somewhat involved in the pass game, I think you could put Matt Ryan in there as well, even though it might be a little less viable. You're taking on a little bit of negative correlation. But another game environment you could predict, say Atlanta gets up to a 2 or 3 score lead and, maybe Julio Jones caught the first touchdown, gets near 100 yards, but Julio Jones is really expensive. Maybe he's not your optimal captain. As Atlanta's playing from ahead in the second half, that's how Gurley racks up his production. And he ends up being the salary saving option that gets you to the captain slot. So running back's interesting. There's a lot more potential game scripts I think you can argue would get you there than just the straight up receiver.
All right. Let's talk about Carolina. Before we do, guys, we have some free content on the site today if you wanted to check it out. If you've been to Awesemo, if you haven't signed up yet, I already told you about the promo code Pumpkin, but if you wanted to check out some of the free content we have today, and we always usually do something cool for the Showdown slates. Yeah, the NFL Showdown rankings and the NFL Express Top Stack tool, the one I was talking about, like the Top Stack tool Lite, both of them are available. I think, as a matter of fact, they're available. The Express Stack tool is available all week, and the Showdown rankings are available for free today. So if you wanted to go check them out, please be my guest. Enjoy it. So we'll start with, what do you say we start with Mike Davis here, since we started with the run game on the Falcons side?
Yeah, let's do it. I think Mike Davis is a good play.
Go ahead. I think he's a good play too. People are maybe a little underwhelmed by only 7 attempts last week, but he has filled in admirably for Christian McCaffrey. And Matt, you and I have said it a million times already. His pass catching upside just lends so much credibility to playing him each week.
Right. And the question, I think, is how much different is he than Christian McCaffrey? Obviously, there's a significant difference. And we even saw the pricing between McCaffrey and Mike Davis come in pretty different, even though I don't think the role is too much different here. Prior to that 7 attempt game, we looked to Mike Davis and he had 4 games with 20 plus touches in all of them. And a lot of that coming in the pass game, which opens up a lot of avenues and keeps him game script independent. So if Atlanta does get up to that big lead, you can still confidently believe Mike Davis will be involved in the game. We haven't really seen a lot of other runners in this offense chip away at him. So I think as a reasonably priced captain here, I mean, he is a little more expensive still than DJ Moore, who's my preferred captain in this offense. I think you can still look to Mike Davis.
Yeah, no question. What do you think about Mike Davis, Todd Gurley lineups? Maybe envisioning this in a spot that, and you know, you're going to get a lot of people say, what are you talking about? Of course, this game's not going to go that way, right? Of course, this isn't going to be a ground and pound type of game. Don't you think a lot of people would have said that about Atlanta and Detroit last week? Things happen. I still think that Carolina is going to be able to open up in the passing game. There's no question. But in the event that they don't, it could be a spot where this pops or where this happens on the ground. But Matt, one other thing, even if it does happen where Carolina, as I would expect, is able to move the ball through the air. I'll get to the passing yard props for Ryan and Bridgewater in just a moment. They might surprise you. Mike Davis is just as involved as anyone in the passing game. So it's a win-win situation.
Yeah, it is. I like Davis a lot for that reason. And on just the game script overall and these teams pounding the ball, it's a showdown slate. We don't know what's going to happen. And a lot of times you're going to receive a larger payoff when you take some of these contrarian approaches. Like if you play both running backs in your lineup, sure, you're taking on some negative correlation. But both of these pass catchers, and particularly Mike Davis, are involved in the pass game. So even if you're taking on some negative correlation between both backs, I think you can be confident in their pass game involvement, which still could get you there to a winning score.
Talking ownership here, Mike Davis, second highest captain spot ownership projection today, second highest overall ownership. So he's going to be up there. And one of the very simple reasons is I think he's too cheap. Yeah, I think Mike Davis's salary is like, he's cheaper than Robbie Anderson, and that stands out to me. He's significantly cheaper than Calvin Ridley by $1,400. It's going to for sure open things up. Now, before we talk pass catchers, like actual wide receivers, tight ends, and the like, how inclined or opposed to the idea, or sorry, in favor of or opposed to the idea are you of having like captain spot Davis with Teddy Bridgewater in the utility, Teddy Bridgewater captain spot Mike Davis in the utility? Do you feel good about that pairing? Is it one you want to get to? Or are you maybe trying to separate yourself from the Mike Davis Bridgewater pairings? Because that might be surprisingly a way you can get a little bit different, just given both of their high projected ownership. Teddy Bridgewater, highest projected ownership on the slate, Matt, just so I can back up what I'm saying here, and highest captain spot projection ownership on the slate.
I think I prefer Davis in the captain slot. I'm certainly fine with pairing them. And it's basically everything we've said already with the target volume, which puts him in play for stacks with Bridgewater. I think the main reason you'd look to Davis over Bridgewater is the bonus structure on DraftKings. It's if Mike Davis gets 100 yards rushing and he catches a couple balls with the PPR structure, I think he's just more likely than Bridgewater to end up as the optimal captain. And then you look at straight up ownership. Where are you gaining leverage? You're gaining more leverage from playing Mike Davis in that slot. You mentioned it, Teddy Bridgewater coming in as the highest owned player. So maybe that pairing is contrarian enough to help you, and especially if you have Davis in the captain slot. But I certainly am not opposed to it.
Right. Yeah. I think the Bridgewater I think when we go back and look at lineup study on Fantasy Cruncher, by the way, you get that add-on when you do sign up at Awesemo. When you look at lineup study, being able to look back at all of the exposures everyone had and all of the stacking combinations they had, I think the Bridgewater Davis stack is going to be wildly popular, especially because Mike Davis is cheaper than many of us would have expected. So, yeah, it's an interesting spot for sure. Now, the pass catchers, DJ Moore. It's really the first thing that stood out to me when I pulled up this slate, Matt, starting to research it is he's pretty inexpensive. I know that his target counts have been kind of volatile and he's had some lackluster performances over the past several weeks or really on the season. And you'd like to see him getting 8, 9, 10 targets per game. But he's gone, this is weird, exactly 93 receiving yards in 3 straight games now. He has 3 touchdowns over that span. He has a 74-yard touchdown and a 57, one of them against Atlanta. He's ripping off monster plays. There's a prop on DraftKings too, will there be a passing play over 37.5 yards? I like the yes on that tonight. But I also just think DJ Moore at this price, whether or not you love the volume, has so much upside on the deep ball against a inferior Falcons defense that I don't know, to me, that price is pretty wild. And his ownership right now is coming in really 50%. It's not that high given his price point.
I think he's probably the most mispriced player on the slate. And
okay, so we're in agreement here then. Yeah.
Yeah, the right way. Like, I think he's a huge value. I'm with you. And we've seen the target share in this offense be somewhat volatile. Robbie Anderson's been a little more consistent, but DJ Moore still has a 23.5% target share on the year, which leads to immense games. And interestingly, they're using DJ Moore as this air yard downfield type receiver. And that's really what Robbie Anderson did in New York. I don't know if this is just another indictment on Adam Gase or not, but DJ Moore's the air yards guy. It leads us up to big plays, which in Showdown, that's something we want. And I think it makes a lot of sense in the captain slot. We've seen these guys trade the target lead through various games. 2 games ago, DJ Moore led the team in targets 11. Last week, DJ Moore was back down at 5 with Anderson at 8. So there's going to be a little bit of give and take here. If we get DJ Moore cheaper and slightly lower owned, it looks like they're coming in pretty comparable tonight. I'll take DJ Moore. Okay,
me too. 50% ownership on a single game slate at 8,200 is not that crazy either. It does have double-digit captain spot projection for ownership, but it all makes sense to me. It is pretty remarkable, and you just touched on Anderson a bit, but that Anderson explain this to me, and maybe you can do a better job of explaining it because I think maybe there's some confusion for me here. I was a little bit surprised that at $1,000 increase, Robbie Anderson, $1,000 more expensive than DJ Moore, is actually projected for more ownership and more captain spot ownership.
I think this is recency bias.
I was going to say the same thing. Yeah.
He's been the wide receiver 1 to this point, but it's not by much. And you look at just raw target volume in air yards. DJ Moore has the lead in air yards. Their target share is close enough where I'm willing to take the break on ownership, go to a lesser owned play in DJ Moore and still feel good about it.
Yeah. And another thing too, when you're looking at just yards per reception, there is one there's a stark contrast here between the two. On these showdown slates, you love knowing that you can get somebody like DJ Moore to just break 1 or 2 loose. Again, he's had some pretty long touchdown passes this season. His average depth of target is almost 2 yards more than Robbie Anderson's. You just mentioned air yards. They're pretty comparable, but on less targets, DJ Moore has more of those. The one big thing is Robbie Anderson, Matt, just isn't dropping passes, right? DJ Moore has an 11% drop rate, Anderson at 4.9. But that just makes me like DJ Moore even more because it shows you that there have been more opportunities that he's failed to convert, which in the event that he does turns into a really big game.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're looking for. All of these are coalescing around DJ Moore. And you watch, we're going to see Robbie Anderson with a monster game where I don't think we're trying.
But even if he does, it's fine. It's just, you got to break down the process.
Yeah, and Robbie Anderson's a phenomenal player. We're not saying don't play Robbie Anderson. You can certainly play him. Just with the ownership coming in a little bit higher on Anderson and all of these factors, the air yards, the drops, everything working against DJ Moore and putting recency bias in the Robbie Anderson camp, you and I are in agreement on this.
Okay. Man, chat popping off right now. Who knew that the conversation between turf and grass could get someone so riled up early in the morning? Cool your jets. It's going to be okay. It's just so wild. Carolina, we talked Davis, we talked pass catchers. Ian Thomas, like you said, just wind sprinting up and down the field. But I would not be doing my job as a host, Matt, if I didn't ask you to elaborate on him a little bit more before we close this out with Curtis Samuel.
I mean, he's probably a positive regression candidate. He's running a route on most of the dropbacks. He just is not getting targeted on those routes. I think his presence on the field, particularly in Showdown, like on a main slate, we're probably never bringing up Ian Thomas's name, but we need to talk about the guys that are on the field a lot. Ian Thomas fits this bill, and he's fairly cheap. So if you're looking for a punt play, I guess similar price range to Brian Hill, and you want someone who's just on the field a lot more, Ian Thomas is your guy. Don't feel confident about it, but we've seen crazier things. Like in the last 4 games, he does have a 5-target game. He just has mixed in 3 other games with 1 target in this man.
Right. It's not good. He has 1 target inside the 5, 1 inside the 10 this year, which are the same one, right? So 3 targets, 3 targets in the red zone. I point that out because maybe you get a rogue touchdown from Ian Thomas. I don't know. It's tough. But I do think Curtis Samuel is a great spot for us to end the skill player discussion. He's actually seeing a little bit more work recently. He's been used quite a bit on 3rd downs as well. He had a rushing touchdown last week. If there's anybody that could have a big game and you say, well, you know what? I should have had more of him. This to me is one of those spots. It doesn't mean I like him, okay, Matt? It doesn't mean I love Curtis Samuel. What it means is that if he ends up having a, say, Josh Reynolds type of game from Monday, nobody should actually be shocked. And obviously he would get there in different ways than Reynolds would. But if he had 7 targets, caught 6 of them for 60 yards and a touchdown, and you realize you don't have any of him, you might look back and kind of kick yourself for it because he is pretty reasonably priced in a very good matchup. So your take on Curtis Samuel, where do you stand here?
I like Curtis Samuel a lot tonight, and I've been reading a little bit of the tea leaves here in Carolina. So Curtis Samuel was banged up a little bit earlier this year. They've been running a lot of Seth Roberts. Now, they cut Seth Roberts. They have 5 receivers on the active roster. Outside of DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel, and Robbie Anderson, those other 2 receivers are Brandon Zylstra and Pharoh Cooper. Last week, Zylstra played 5 snaps. Pharoh Cooper only played 2. We looked at Curtis Samuel. He was only out there actually 48% of snaps. So we're removing 19 Seth Roberts snaps from this offense. Where do they go? Do they go to Curtis Samuel? Does he become more of a 70, 80% type player? Do they go to a guy like Zylstra or Pharoh Cooper? I think probably not. Or maybe do they play a different personnel grouping, like put in more Chris Manhertz in 12 personnel? He only ran 8 routes last week. So if they're trying to pass a lot, I think the most likely scenario is those extra routes and snaps that were coming from Seth Roberts do go to Curtis Samuel as the number 3 receiver. And his snap share probably jumps near 70 or 80%. If that is the case, Curtis Samuel is coming in underpriced.
Yes, he is. Nice breakdown, by the way. That definitely it gives us a good idea of what we're doing. Matt, you say reading the tea leaves, man. That's why we bring you on here to make the big executive decisions. And I think you might be spot on with Curtis Samuel. Everything you just said adds up. So among DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel, Robbie Anderson, Hunter Hurst, Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, Mike Davis, Todd Gurley, and then, of course, Matt Ryan and Teddy Bridgewater. We have a lot of big decisions to make tonight.
Yeah, we do. Again, think about game script, whatever you think might happen, and it doesn't necessarily even have to be the game script that bookmakers are projecting. Like, right now, we're getting Carolina as a slight favorite. If you think Atlanta wins this game, think about that a little bit and try to build your lineups with it in mind. Maybe you use like Gurley as a captain, but I would just say be mindful because I think we do have a couple underpriced plays and we also have a couple players that are overpriced in Ridley and Julio Jones. I don't know. Is that how you're approaching tonight?
Yeah, absolutely. And I like the idea of throwing Gurley in the captain spot, but I feel like I'm going to have more with someone, maybe DJ Moore or a pass catcher in there, and then have Todd Gurley in the utility, just because I think roster construction becomes a little bit more convoluted when you throw Gurley in there. Not to say it won't work or can't work. It definitely can, and it has many times in the past. But I don't mind going, say, heavy on the Panthers pass attack, but also heavy on Todd Gurley. This isn't a spot where I think you have to go passing attack, both quarterbacks, because it's going to be super tough. and then rounding it out with some dirt cheap guys. But I'm not particularly high on any defense here. I think if you want to play a kicker, you can. But Matt, if I'm going to play a kicker or both kickers, then I think the main objective here is you got to have the running back exposure in those lineups as well, under the assumption that it's probably not a super high scoring game with a lot of touchdowns. So it's all about playing that story out in your head, right?
Yeah, I think so. I'm more interested in kickers when I think it's going to be like a blowout on one side and we don't see a lot of production on the other. Okay. So maybe like a 5-1 construction. Otherwise, I just think it's fairly likely if we see back and forth affair that the kickers don't make it into the optimal.
Yeah, I think it's very possible too. Rostering kickers can be very frustrating. They're very often they don't get there. Defenses in a spot like this with a 50+ point total. If you have anything to add here, go for it. Maybe you see something I'm missing.
I don't think so. I think we hit on the defenses pretty well. I don't see how Atlanta is going to get after the passer here without Takk McKinley. It's something they've already struggled to do a little bit. And now McKinley being out is certainly going to hurt them there. We already see Carolina's weakness really being up front for them without K'Wan Short. So I'm not very interested in the defenses, especially with a near 51 point total, a total that might actually be depressed because of weather. Like if there wasn't a tropical depression or a tropical storm? If this wasn't a factor, do you think we'd have a higher total?
Probably, yeah. But I don't know, because it looks like it's moving really fast. It's moving like 40 miles per hour. I was under the assumption that it was going to rip through and we'd be okay by 8:20. But again, not a meteorologist. None of us necessarily know. I think we'll be in the clear. So maybe not. Maybe 51's okay. Maybe it'd be at like 52 and a half. But I don't think it would be that much different in a spot like this. Now, I'm coming up next with Matt Savoca. It's the marathon matchups breakdown. You guys want to stick around for that. It's everything you need to know for the Week 8 slate. We're going game by game, touching on every one of those, giving comprehensive analysis. Hopefully you'll join us coming up in 12 minutes, 11 Eastern time, right here on the Awesemo YouTube channel. And then, Matt, you've got a show coming up with Kyle Dvorak breaking everything down for the FanDuel slate, doing a straight FanDuel-specific strategy show as well.
2 p.m. Eastern time, me and Kyle Dvorak. We're going to get to everything on FanDuel.
Yep. And then Kyle will be back again tonight, live before lock, for this showdown show with Alex Baker, Awesemo himself. They're taking you up to lock at 8:20, starting at 7:20 Eastern. So we got a lot going on today. Hopefully you'll stick around and join us. Wish you guys the best of luck. Hit that thumbs up before you go. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you always know when new content's coming up next. Follow Matt. Do it. Just trust me. Do it. Matt _ Gajewski on Twitter. Follow me if you're not already. Loughran _D, LOUGHY _D, and Awesemo.com at Awesemo _com. We'll see you back here very shortly at Awesemo.com.